Well, we want to welcome everybody here who's in attendance this morning, as well as our wonderful guests this morning. And we want to thank you for coming to the CURE, Center for Urban Renewal and Education's kind of panel discussion. And this is going to be real neat because it's Star Parker and GERARD Robinson. But we really want to look at what are the new opportunities in the new administration and kind of education, new administration. What does it look like? And let me first begin by introducing GERARD Robinson here, who to my immediate right, which is you have an incredible story. You're currently a scholar at AEI. You've also spent time in the administration as far as education in Florida as well as Virginia, and I call it from Harvard to Howard. Would that be a question, or Howard to Harvard maybe?
Right.
As far as your educational background, but you
started off at a community college.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Start off at community college, and but you have an amazing story. Really appreciate your insight, and thank you for coming this morning. Is the first thing we want to be able to say to you.
Thank you for having me.
To our far right here is, of course, Star Parker, the founder and president of CURE, and Star has worked tirelessly on issues that restore dignity and fight freedom and poverty, and restore poverty, excuse me, restore dignity. It's early in the morning. And provide freedom and fighting poverty for people's lives. One of those essential elements of fighting that poverty is education and education reform, which you have talked prolifically on, written numerous articles. You're a nationally syndicated columnist as well. And so we'd love to hear from you this morning, but thank you for joining us as well. And I think it's going to be a good discussion and a good opportunity to talk. So I'll jump right in.
Okay.
And my jumping right in is this. And again, my name is Reverend Derek McCoy as well, with CURE. I'm meant to do that and serve now as the Executive Vice President of CURE. But I want to jump right in this regard. I've been thinking about this quite a bit. There's a lot of talk about school choice, options for education, and a plethora of other things. There's a lot of discussion now, as you know, with a lot of pending changes in our administration, education, and the new secretary potentially being confirmed. But really think about it like this. There's a lot of discussion around, hey, if school choice begins to move forward, it's going to basically deconstruct the public school system, because if you have money from one end and then you give it to school options and choice, how does that work? And is that really the truth? I want to kind of demystify this thing right now as the elephant in the room. Is that true?
And you're asking me?
Yes.
Well, Reverend Derek, I'm excited to be here, and I'm excited to for this opportunity to explore with GERARD Robinson what needs to come next. We have a window of opportunity with Betsy DeVos being confirmed. I'm sure she will be confirmed to be the next secretary over the Department of Education. And the reason this is important is because Betsy has spent her life in this arena to see to it that poor children have options. When you talk about what has happened in the public school arena and what has broken down is competition. This is why we're in the dilemma that we are. We need school options, money to follow children to the schools the parents want, because they don't have enough options to get a quality education. When you have a monopoly over anything, whether it's in business and or now in the public arena, you are not going to do your best. And the people that are getting hit the hardest when it comes to these limited options and educational choice are the poorest, the weakest link amongst us. They are either not getting a high school diploma, or they're getting a high school diploma from a failing school, so it's worthless. And if you don't have a good education, your chances to live in poverty have skyrocketed. If we want people not to live in poverty in this country, they need school choice.
Wow, that's phenomenal. What about you, GERARD? Do you think, and that's a great question, Star, in terms of, or a great response, because do you think that if we bring competitiveness into our school systems, that it's going to destabilize the public school structure?
The answer is no, and the first place I would take a look is Milwaukee. So Milwaukee is home to the first urban-based voucher program going back to the 1990s. And so in 1990, they said if we introduce vouchers, and at this time it was for low-income kids, it's going to destroy the Milwaukee public school system. Now, in 1990, you had over 100,000 students in Milwaukee public schools and a budget of about $937 million. Fast forward to 2016, the population of students has gone from 100,000 to nearly 70,000. And yet the budget has gone from $937 million to over $1 billion. Enrollment and the budget. At the same time, you have approximately 28,000 kids in the voucher program. There have been at least 3 superintendents, while not throwing a lot of confetti for vouchers, they've said 2 things. Number one, the voucher schools have made us as a public system think differently. And number 2, we now have to actually go out to neighborhoods and compete for kids. Here's what we offer in Milwaukee Public Schools. They've got a great superintendent who's there now. I know some of their board members. I lived in Milwaukee for 2 years, and I can tell you, all the fears and concerns about what it will do negatively to a public school system simply hasn't happened in Milwaukee, and even in D.C., where we have the Opportunity Scholarship Program, we've seen growth.
And let me add, though, and parents want choices to where they should send their children to school. When you think about even charter schools, when you have 1 million children on a list to get in a school, the marketplace, the poor parent is saying, please help us. And we're going to have that opportunity, I believe, in a DeVos leading up the Department of Education with Mrs. DeVos leading the Department of Education, because she has looked at these situations. She has worked in these communities to make sure that children have these types of options so that the poorest student gets to compete, gets an opportunity to learn how to read and how to write and how to do math. It is critically important, especially as a society that has unraveled when it comes to family life. And so we have escalated the number of children that are living in at-risk situations in single-headed households. That parent is struggling. The only place that we as a society get to interject our values of hard work, of disciplines, of saving and investing, the only place we get them is when they get to school, in the kindergarten. So why would we trap them in a one-size-fits-all scenario? One size does not ever fit all, and any woman that shops can tell you that it doesn't. So we need options, and even including vouchers, charter, homeschool. Let the parent decide. Why is the teachers union deciding where children go to school based on their zip code?
That's a great start, because one of the things that have been, and I'll direct this back to you, one of the things that have been said is maybe a critique on Betsy DeVos was, you know, she spent so much time trying to help underprivileged kids and trying to really help them with their educational plot. I don't find that as a critique at all. I find that as something that's good.
You got to be.
What do you think about that?
Well, the teachers union are trying to make this case. They're saying, all right, here you have this billionaire woman who's spending her billions of dollars helping poor students. This is not good. Really? When did this not become good, while that same teachers union is spending $33 million to interrupt elections to keep children trapped in failing schools? When you look at it, even what they pay the teachers through the unions, the teachers are making like $50,000 on average a year, while the union bosses are making $100,000 and the top dog is making $500,000. I think it's noble that this woman, who can do anything in the world, they have resources, that she would spend the type of time that she does helping the poor students. I've met some of the students that are in her program, and it's encouraging to see that somebody cares enough about that weakest link so that they will make sure that they get the type of education that they need. There is discussion that, oh, she's just going to go in there and disrupt the Department of Education. I think it perhaps needs a little refinement. You know, it's the only business that government is only business that doesn't change the way that it's been doing business for 50 years. Most other businesses in the competitive world change over time. They serve the market.
Wow, I love that. Gerard, she brings me to a thought process here. George Parker, former Washington Teachers Union president, he said not too long ago in an interview that, and when he was asked about, he's now, I don't know if I want to call it a proponent, but definitely strong in favor of charter schools and maybe some choice options, where he used to not be. He used to be on the other side of the fence of this. Why do you think he's evolved on this issue and come to a point of saying, hey, this may not be the best for our kids if we stay on this one side of public school only?
I had a chance to meet Mr. Parker several months ago at an event, I believe in New Orleans, that was sponsored by Ed Choice, formerly Freedman Foundation. And one of the I mean, most powerful presentations I've heard in many years. He says, I was a strong teacher union person. I knew two things. I knew we had power, and I knew we had the message. And he said one day he talked to a young child, and she said, are you going to do everything you can to help me? And he said, yes. And he said he walked away and realized I just lied to her.
Wow.
Because I have power and I have the message. And so, like many of us, we go through our own epiphany, and he decided my decision to support charter schools and different options isn't an anti-public school sentiment.
Right.
It's simply a pro-option, or going to what you said, a pro-parental option piece. As you said, one size doesn't fit all. Even in our public school system, you've got chocolate milk, you've got traditional milk. Depending upon one area you're in, you can have skim or low fat. And so even within the school system, we have diversity of options. And so for someone like Parker, he's got a great story, and it's one of many, particularly as someone who's a Democrat.
Wow.
Or an independent.
Well, you know this as well, and I appreciate that. The former Secretary, Arnie Duncan, and then, and who I know you know, and then the most recent is John B. King, which I have questions for both of you on this, but particularly Gerard in reference to Arnie Duncan. You know, he talks about and says, well, you know, I don't really care if they're D, or R, or I, meaning their political affiliations, but he says all we need to do is just have better test scores and better graduation rates. Does that really solve the answer to our educational issues now in our country?
It's a step toward solving them, but it's also a step toward asking better questions. So under the Obama administration, we have now an 83% high school graduation rate, highest in the country. I think that's a step in the right direction. When Arnie had come on board in 2010, we had 2,000 dropout factories, where nearly 75% of Hispanics and the African Americans attended. Now that number 2016, well, I guess 17 now, is down about 800. So you've seen a dip.
I'm sorry, I hate to interrupt people while they're talking. Can you go back just one more second when you say dropout factories?
Sure.
I almost get teary-eyed because I'm just listening to what you just said. How many people were dropping out?
So there were 2,000 high schools in the United States that accounted for 50% of all the dropouts in the country. Yeah. 2,000. We know where they are. We know who's there.
You say, you know, that's a high number, 2,000, but it's doable. It's
right.
What we try to do is all at the same time. If we could just focus on those 2,000, we could fix them.
Right. And what Arnie was saying is in the 2,000, over 50% of the African Americans and Hispanics were in those kids, you know, high, what they call minority majority. That's right. So the number's now down to 800. You know, so you've seen some things move there. Arnie worked with Republicans, he worked with Democrats, he worked with conservatives and liberals. And I think some of that comes from the fact that he had worked as a superintendent. So there's some great things going. Where he and I disagree, and it's no secret, is over the Opportunity Scholarship Program. We were talking about Dr. Howard Fuller earlier. Myself, Dr. Fuller, Kevin Chavez, Virginia Walford, and several other people in 2009 stood in front of the Department of Education, likely to be arrested. We had the Institute for Justice there to get us out, because I believe at that time 244 students had been put out of the Opportunity Scholarship Program. Right. There was no money taken from the traditional public school system, no money taken from public charter schools. It was just a political decision. And while we were never arrested, we made a statement. A few weeks later, that led to nearly 5,000 people having a rally in not too far away from here, which led to ultimately us getting support for the Opportunity Scholarship. In the 2016 omnibus bill, there was no money for it. And so that's been a political hot potato. Again, Arnie and I agree to disagree on that one, but I expect under Trump administration, under Republican legislature, and DeVos' secretary, that will change.
They're running out of excuses for why poor children are not educated in this country. And whether you are a liberal and or a Democrat, you have to, at some point, start asking a deeper question. Why are we insisting on keeping these children trapped in these failing schools? And I think that that question will be asked more as Betsy DeVos sits in that chair to say, I want to look at all options to make sure that that weakest link gets a quality education.
Wow. Star, you've written some great articles, and one of the articles I'm thinking about, because this is a question that's going to come up even with Ms. DeVos, but I think with John B. King, even though he served a short time as Secretary of Education, he was very forceful in terms of really executing on that Office of Civil Rights within the Department of Education, trying to really, go after Title IX funds and different avenues of funds. And you wrote about this specifically in one of your articles in terms of kind of the liberty aspect of things and the freedom for students. Can you expound maybe a little bit more on why do you see these things tying together, and then how can we get out of this and really focus on the kids?
They tie together what you're alluding to is the cultural war.
Yes.
We are biblical and we are secular, and it is individuals' choices. But what happens is we are forcing ourselves in the public square to be in the same environment. What you need when you are a very diverse society, which we are, with free individuals, is you need a limited role of government. You want less government so that we can have peace and unity and more diversity and flexibility, as some would say that that's their end goal. When you force people into the same small space, you're going to always have fight. What vouchers will do is allow money to follow children to whatever school the parent wants. So if you want a school that focuses on biblical truths, then you go there. If you want a school that focuses on transgender identifications, then you go there. You allow the parent to decide what type of environment and what type of worldview they want their children to have. Much of the discussion we're having and the great debate, the tension points in our society, is because we're trying to come up with this one-size-fits-all. So now you have a common core curriculum that many parents object. So we need to just start dismantling the role of government. Educating children belongs very local. Remember, just a few years back, one of the parents of a young child, a first grader, was arrested because they wanted to send their child to a school that was outside of their zip code. So they lied on the application and put the child in the zip code of the grandfather. Another used a babysitter's address and was arrested. This has to stop in a free country. Parents need options. And I think that with this new opportunity under the Trump administration, we're going to start seeing much more discussion about how we can allow for flexibility, local controls, and when you get to the question of the Office of Civil Rights, we have other mechanisms in our society now that we don't have to look at what happened 60 years ago. We can move forward to say, if there is a complaint, you have other places to go. We don't have to be the watchdogs that have developed out into their own engines now in every single department, costing hundreds of millions of dollars in some cases just to go find something that might not even be there. These are choices that parents should be able to make. And if there's a problem in their local community, then they have some place that they can go for recourse.
Wow.
Interesting. Parents are arrested for using a different address to get their students a better option. How many parents have been arrested for sending their son or daughter to play sports outside the system?
Outside the system. You know, interesting, because race, it comes into this. Both of the parents that were arrested were African American. Both of them were very poor moms by themselves, and they just wanted better for their child. And so they lied. They lied on the application, and they got arrested. That's what today's environment is. But what we should think about as a society is what's happening because of the strong controls of the Department of Education is white students, people that have flexibility and finances, are leaving the public school system. The only ones now trapped in the system are our Latino and Black children. I mean, it's a stark contrast now. In fact, the numbers of in our public school, over 50% now are are a minority, and about 78% of the private school environment are the whites. People want quality, and if they can pay for it or they can move, they get it. The only people that can are those that are now trapped in these hard-hit neighborhoods. That's where the focus should be, not trying to do the whole thing through a No Child Left Behind or a Race to the Top. Let's just focus on that problem and fix it. That one little problem in that one little zip code in that one little area, and fix just that.
Wow. Gerard, help me understand. Give me some perspective, because you've seen many different systems as work, and I know got a lot of accolades for the work that you've done in Florida as well as Virginia. But they've really come a long way in terms of and at AEI. But in terms of the education system, they've come a long way in terms of choice and options. What are some success stories that you could say could be really good potential models as we move forward in the next so many years?
So there's something in Tennessee called Tennessee Score. And you have two governors back to back who said, not only do we want to make sure that Tennessee is a place to do great business, but it's also a great place to raise families. And often the school is the anchor of that. And so they made sure that there was business, education, philanthropy, and social services and others at the table having conversations. Tennessee Score is looked upon as a model. It worked in part because governors said we want this to happen. So there's always a role for governors. I'd say take a look at D.C. You're from the city. Back in the 90s when you had Mayor Williams in the seat, you had Kevin Chavis in the city council, you had Rod Page at that time as secretary. And they decided, and I worked for Arlington Ackerman at the time, who was superintendent of schools of D.C., and they said we want to make a capital city a world-class city with a world-class education. And we've got some challenges. And so they decided to create a three-sector initiative: funds for public schools, funds for public charters, funds for vouchers. And the city you have today is a result in part for decisions made back in the 90s, even on the West Coast. So there's multiple models, but what I've seen for success, there are three things. There's got to be leadership from the government sector, whether it's a governor, mayor, city council person or other. Number two, there should be involvement of the business community, however you define it. And third, there's going to be involvement of educators. For me, it's about what I call a civil society approach. We cannot, nor must we expect public schools to do everything. They simply can't. But they can do a lot if we wrap our arms around them as a hug versus a choke.
That's a good point. That's a really good point. Star, what do you think in terms of as we move forward? How do you think some of the things, if you were kind of writing your wand and saying these are some key things that we really should be focusing on, what would you say?
I think that we're going to see a realignment in how we educate children. I mean, we are a technological world now. The old model just shouldn't be brought into the 21st century the way that we're trying to drag this 100-year-old dinosaur. But it will also include then watchdogs. We're going to need to make sure that the system is working effectively. There are some charters and some charter companies out there that are not looking out for the best interests of the students as opposed to looking at their bottom line. So we'll see that realigning. But what will happen is similar to in business. You'll make mistakes, but in addition to making mistakes, you sometimes may have to ask your accountant or your lawyer about some certain decisions. So I just think what has to happen in our society is there has to be a willingness to say, let's try something new. We are competing with the world. When George Bush was president, he used to say all of the time, we're only 6% of the whole world. And now we're seeing the manifestation of countries that used to be third world countries investing heavily in education and not putting shackles. They're actually allowing for opportunities for their people and their populations to be educated. And if we don't start getting our weakest link to compete with this, then we're the ones that are going to have a challenge. I've often reminded people to think about Michael Brown, who we saw dead in the street in Ferguson, and compare his life to Simone Biles, who we saw accept the goal on behalf of our country as a a stellar gymnast now in the world. What was the difference? They both came out of poverty. They both had horrible family situations that they couldn't reconcile as children. And the difference is that Michael Brown, 8 days before he died, received a diploma, a high school diploma that was worthless. It was from a school that had lost its accreditation because it just wouldn't better itself. And Simone Biles was rescued by her grandfather, who put her in a private Catholic school and then homeschooled her for a while, and then she ended up excellent. We have to stop making excuses for why we can't look at the Michael Browns in our society and have pity and have compassion for situations that they had no control over, and allow that child to go to a school where men wear collars and will care about him.
Wow. Well, you bring me, I have a couple of different segments, but one of the segments, and this is maybe back to both of you all, waiting. And I say the word waiting from this perspective. There's a voice on one side of the aisle that says, you know what? Just hold on. Just hold on to the Michael Browns. Hold on to, you know, I say even folks like myself that are raising kids in a county that should have great schools. We're paying more per child for those schools in our taxes than the county right across the road that has far better results. And I'm referring to Prince George's in Montgomery in Maryland. Now, the interesting thing though, but they say, wait, just hold on, wait. Let your kids go through, we're getting it fixed, we're getting it ready. Dr. Rick Perry, and you know him from up in upstate and his work in this area, he says, I don't have time to wait. I don't have time for my kids to be results of the waiting category for you guys to fix this, because he says that public schools have done us a disservice. Any comments there?
Well, the first person that came to mind was Virginia Walden Ford, who said, I'm not waiting anymore. And she as a single African-American mom, championed the DC scholarship. And her son never received one. He had to graduate in the failing school that she was trying to get him out of, went on into the military and did well. But she made sure that other children were able to escape. So yeah, we can wait, I suppose, to correct this, but we don't have to anymore. With Betsy DeVos in charge of education, who has a long history in all options, she wants the public school systems to work. She understands competition and knows that that's what they need to really better themselves. With her in charge, there are 33 Republican governors, 30 legislatures that are under Republican control. Republicans want school choice. This has been one of the difference between the political parties. They want school options and choice. So I don't think that we'll have to wait much longer, regardless of what the Congressional Black Caucus says or the union says or anyone else that has been standing, NAACP, and any others that have been standing in the way of school choice. We're going to have parental choice in this country. And then, if it doesn't work, maybe we'll go back to the old model, or maybe we'll move into the future of whatever is necessary to get these children educated. There was a study done, and it showed that if African American and Latino boys, would just graduate high school, just if their current graduate, if they would just get to the place where they graduated high school with their reading skill, with the math skill, and with the writing skill, the contribution to society would be $500 billion. We spend $900 billion a year in the welfare programs. A contribution from this community of $500 billion is huge. This is human capital and human potential, and it's wasting away. We're locking it up instead in the jails. What we need to do is refocus ourselves when we have them as a society, when they're 5 years old, but let them be in a school that will work for them.
Wow. So yesterday we celebrated Martin Luther King's birthday. Right. And he authored many books, one called Why We Can't Wait. And so as we think about it from King's perspective, why must we wait? If Sojourner Truth had to wait for slavery to end, we'd still be in slavery. If we had to wait we just had a new football champion, Clemson. If we had to wait for University of South Carolina to get equally great before we did, it wouldn't happen. Only when it comes to particularly our kids are we told to wait. We don't tell people to wait in line too long. And when we go to the airport, we say the line's too long, we don't tell people to wait. So while we're fixing the public school system, let's continue to make this work as well. It shouldn't be or, it should be and. While we're fixing this
gotcha.
and making this happen.
That's right.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
And competition will help that happen. That is what competition does. It makes you better, or you are going out of business. Remember when Jeb Bush was in charge, was the governor of Florida, and No Child Left Behind had just come into new law, and so a lot of different governors were starting to say, okay, we're going to look, because now our schools are going to be graded, and we're going to make sure that these schools get a good grade, or we're going to start losing money. That's a good incentive, I suppose, to start trying to fix what's broken down. And by the second go around, he sent a message to all of the education apparatus in his state that if your school is on that failing list again, I'm going to allow your students out. They're going to get vouchers. Not one school was on that failing list the following year. Not one. All of a sudden, they figured it out. So competition is what our public schools need so that they will get to their fullest potential. I know a lot of teachers. I have teachers throughout my family.
Yeah.
I have friends that are personal friends that are principals. They want it to work. They're not there just to sit around. They chose that profession because they really love children and want to make it work. What has happened is over time, their hands have been tied, that they cannot look at these children as unique individuals and do what it takes to get them to the levels that they need to be.
Wow. You said a mouthful there, because I often think about it this way, is that don't we have a short perspective, or maybe the wrong perspective of this? Because oftentimes America says, well, we want to be innovative. We want to look at the future. We want to look at what's down the road, make sure that the kids coming out of our schools and graduating are competitive in a global society. Mm-hmm. But then on the short term, you know, like I said a few minutes ago, we're telling some parents to wait, to hold on, to think about this. So the competitive nature is there. Going back to George Parker, in kind of what you were saying, Star Parker, is that...
No relation.
I was going to ask.
No, don't know him. A lot of Parkers out there, including a pen company.
No relation, I got you.
I wish.
But one of the things he said specifically was, hey, he realized that teachers just don't have the ability to make decisions and to be innovative in the classroom the way that they should be, to be able to, you know, instruct those kids. I was amazed recently. Let me tell you this one. I was in a class setting and in a group setting not too long ago with a mom. The mom had a 4th grader and a 6th grader. And she said, hey, look, I'm just a mom. And she says one of her kids are doing really well in the public school system. She said she stayed there. The other one was a little bit more challenged, is now in an online program excelling. Mm-hmm. And so
I think we should look at more
when you look at the online program, which would be a choice, she's excelling. The mom says, I was blown away by what potential my child could have. She just happened to have a slight more lenient, you know, more ability to go on this online program and really excel versus being in the classroom with a lot of other kids. Right. And so that speaks to innovation. That speaks to being able to make decisions at a teacher level. And help me understand, what do you think about that and those kinds of programs driving some of these choices?
So Betsy DeVos has her hearing today before the Senate. And one of the big criticisms, particularly from the teacher union, is that her support for school choice means by default she's anti-teacher. Now, I've been involved for over 2 decades in the school choice movement. I could see why some people would think that our support for school choice means we're anti-teacher, which in fact isn't the case. But take a look at charter schools. The first charter school law in the United States was passed in Minnesota. That law was set up in part to allow teachers to do innovative things in the classroom they couldn't do in the traditional classroom. The second state to create a charter school law, California, in their law, parents couldn't create charter schools, it was only teachers. And so if you look at the push for the charter school movement, it was about teacher innovation and the ability to do new things. You go back to the 80s, you had site-based learning. Charter schools, I helped open a charter school in Atlanta. Our principal can sign checks. Our principal can hire his or her teachers on the spot. The teachers can do certain things. I tell people there's nothing magical per se just about charters, but why not give the same level of regulatory flexibility to traditional schools? Why not? I would support it.
I think you mentioned the regulation, the regulation over schooling. I think that is where parents and some teachers become concerned, because if you have everybody out there doing all kind of things, then where is a monitor to know that that child or that environment really is working?
Okay.
The time to find that out is not when they get to college and or try to get in a college. So I believe that there will be an assurance as we're changing the system for those types of accountability measures. We've tried many things over the last, since 1979 when the Department of Education came into existence. That won't stop, and that's the assurance for parents. The left sends out fears because they want the status quo. They have a lot invested in the status quo. I'm sure that, you know, when cars came about, everybody with horse and buggy companies were pretty concerned and wanted to know what was going to happen to their livelihood. But we were able to get through that transition, and I think that education and educating our children will be able to get through that transition if we would just open ourselves to say we can't continue to do what we've been doing for the last 100 years. People are falling through the cracks.
And online education, I mean, we're already there.
Yeah, we're already there.
You know, Florida legislature passed a law where you have to at least take one online course before you get a high school diploma in the public school system. You had over a third of the students at the college level taking classes online. You've got, I live in Virginia, so you've got K-12, but you have other online companies. That is just where we are. And even at the higher education level, there are a lot of concerns about for-profit companies. Are there some bad actors? Absolutely.
Right. That's
That's because they're bad actors. That's not because they're for-profit.
That's right. That's right. That's right. That's a good point.
But there are a lot of for-profit companies that are filling a niche that traditional nonprofit schools can't. And so when you see a 565% increase in student enrollment between 1990 and 2013 in the for-profit enrollment, and you only see about a 30% in nonprofit private and, of course, nonprofit public, that should be a signal that people can't go to school, they don't have meal plans, they're not throwing frisbees, they're working. And they need to have access to classes at 2 in the morning or 2 in the afternoon. And so the online part, that's going to radically change what we do.
Wow.
Yeah.
You know, there's a video out, and I can't even remember the guy's name who crafted it, but basically he walks through the cycle of history of our school system and says, okay, you know what, if you compare a car to what it was in 1936 to what it is today, it's different. If you compare...
Sir Ken Robinson?
I think it is Sir Ken Robinson.
And no relation to
Unless
Robinson.
I got Parker and Robinson here.
Unless you're in Cuba, because they still drive those cars.
Yeah,
poor
yeah.
things.
Isn't that something?
Maybe
Yeah.
Toyota's going to try to get in there. It's like, well,
The
we're
cigar
going in. Let's go.
has
But go ahead. He
yeah.
did that. Depending on where you live.
But it's interesting because he does this comparative analysis about all of these things that have changed technologically and in our society, going all the way through the phone. You know, if you look at the old rotary phones or the, you know, the crank and dial phones to what we have now in terms of something in your hand. And then it goes to comparing the school class structure today to 100 years ago. It's virtually the same.
That's right.
And it really says, hey, he's passing, it's kind of all done in a courtroom setting, and he's passing judgment and saying, hey, look, you failed.
It's, you know, it's why government should be limited. It's why government should be in the role that the founding fathers intended, because people change, lives change, information changes, time changes, and you want to be competitive.
Yeah.
And you want the market to say, here's what we need next. You're hard-pressed to find anything. He could do a chart in every department in government like that one and find the same thing. As soon as you get to, or you do it in business, you do it here, and then you get to government, find out that we have dinosaurs that are over 100 years old and we're doing it the exact same way. This just has to stop. Our youth won't even allow it. Even our poorest of youth, they have little gadgets. They know what to do when they have opportunity. My 4-year-old granddaughter downloaded on my phone her little Mickey app. And I didn't even know how she knew there was a Mickey app on my phone. And, you know, she could get to it. They know what to do. And so we need to get our education up to that level so that we can be competitive around the world.
I want to do a little experiment, and this is for the viewing audience. So I'm looking at one gentleman to my right. Are you wearing a watch? 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 And we had one guy wearing a watch in the back.
Don't tell his age.
And one over here.
10 years
watch.
And that's the hybrid. 10 years ago, most heads would have said, yes, I have a watch. And so the question is, what is that used for?
Yeah.
You have the hybrids very different. So with every decade, you have a different change in technology. So when we have this conversation in 10 years, the question could be, where's the camera?
Yes.
Wow.
Because it's already in the air.
Yes,
And it's us three, but then we'll have holograms of Leslie Heiner sitting over here.
That's true.
And someone else.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's absolutely true. And that speaks to where technology is, because I think about it oftentimes, especially with, you know, I say this as a parent. I can talk from a parent perspective. And I look at it, we created some of this because, you know, my past career was really in telecommunications and really working in that arena. And so I said, you know, I was one of those guys that helped push some of this technology forward. Now sitting at the dinner table and trying to get my kids to focus.
You have to get the attention of them. But we want them to do better, and we want to push them. And so do poor parents.
Yeah.
One of the reasons I think that the unions are so adamant to not allow for school options for poor parents is because poor parents send their children to Christian schools. This is something that a lot of people don't want to talk about, but when you look at someone, it doesn't matter if her life is collapsed, her 5 children are from 5 men, she has drug habit, struggling through welfare dependency, she wants better for her children. Yeah. And if she's given that option, they do what those two did to even the point of being arrested. They will send their children to at-risk schools. At CURE, Urban CURE, we run a clergy center. As you know, Derek, you're a part of Urban CURE and you actually run the center. These pastors, many of them are closing their schools. They're in our hardest hit community.
Yeah. Right.
They really want to help the children of the community, but the money won't follow the child to the school that they have there. And the left sends lies to say, oh, they're just going to go and infiltrate the suburban schools. No, parents want local education. Right. What's happening now is similar to what happened in the 40s and 50s during Jim Crow. They have to pass good quality schools that are at the local church to get to the failing government-controlled school. So what we want to do is allow for parents to say, maybe I'll stop there. Let's just open it up for them to decide where their child should be educated and build out a system of accountability conducive with this new environment, even in this technological age.
And really what you're saying is parents should be, regardless of their economic status, they're smart enough to know that their kids deserve options.
They even had a third grade.
They can choose.
Think of the time when the grandparent couldn't read, but they wanted their kid, and they read. And then that one graduated high school, and then the next generation graduated college.
You know, I'm thinking about Dr. Carson. He said he didn't know his mother couldn't read, but she was making him read every day, and his brother read every day.
Looking at the book report saying,
Exactly, yeah. You know, and she would review the book report. And that's an interesting thing. Let me dispel one myth before we kind of start wrapping up. There's a myth out there, and I say it's a myth because I've listened to it before and from NAACP and saying, hey, look, vouchers started back in segregation. And really it was given to whites to really try to help them get to other schools and to really get out of any kind of attempts of having their kids integrate and mingle with black kids. So the manipulative use of it then says we should shut down the use of it altogether. Do you agree with that sentiment? I mean, why? I really find it appalling at times, sometimes, in terms of how can they have this position? And I get history, but if you go forward, I mean, we should be thinking, I mean, do we get to a place where we forgive and forget? Do we move forward? I mean, or do we just stay trapped in this old mindset? This is what it was, so therefore we should never use it again.
Yeah, fear is an incredible deterrent to freedom. And what we find is a lot of our traditional civil rights organizations stuck in that era. They just, and frankly, I suppose I had gotten beat over the head if I walked down a certain street, I probably wouldn't walk down that street anymore. And every time I see that street, I would kind of think about it, and it would be a ghost of the past. But the fear is not warranted. In fact, you could probably speak to this better than I can, Gerard, that we're starting to find by choice parents saying, I want an all-boys school. New York, I think, is experimenting with options like this. Black parents, black boys in black schools.
That's right.
Because the issue is not whether we're forcing integration. The issue is our children learning so that they can compete. Once you have an education and you're in a competitive environment, diversity will naturally happen because the workplace is very diverse.
In 2004, I authored a chapter in a book. It's from the Cato Institute. And the book chapter title is Brown, Vouchers, and the Philosophy of Language. I'll make sure you get a copy. And in there, I took a look at your exact issue. What happened after Brown v. Board of Education and the creation of what we call vouchers. And in fact, it was someone from the NAACP back in the late 90s who said, I'm not for vouchers because they were used for segregated purposes. So I went back and took a look at the history, and I drew a fine line. There was a time in American history where public money was used to basically create white segregated academies. I called that fear-based choice. And that's exactly what it was. Between 1956 up to 1969, you had a number of those schools on the rise. Courts got involved, NAACP, the Legal Defense Fund got involved, and helped to change that. 1990 is what I call liberty-based choice. 1964 Civil Rights Act is in most of the voucher laws, in most of the tax credit laws. The ability to try to create those academies today, I won't pretend that they don't exist, but the ability to create those kind of academies in 2017, the way you did in 1957, isn't the same. And it's true. There was a time when vouchers were used against us. But I go back to something that Thurgood Marshall said. He said there was a time when the Constitution was used to put us in our place, and yet he used the same Constitution to argue Brown v. Board of Education. And so, as you know, as a reverend, you know, you can make those old bones speak.
Yeah, boy, that's a mouthful. Same argument used in Scripture.
Get up.
Over and over.
That's what he said.
Absolutely.
And I think that we should keep that perspective when we're talking about educating other people's children. This is something that we're doing out of benevolence. This is not something that has to happen. The American people have made a decision that in order to be a civil population, we have to be an educated population. So we're going to pool our resources to educate other people's children. But the question needs to be asked, then should we go into the education business to do that? Or should the parent then decide where they're going to get that education? And I think that that's all we're saying with vouchers is let the parent decide where they want to send their child to school. We force children to schools, but we shouldn't any more than, you know, when we have a food stamp program, we don't go into the grocery store business and tell people that receive food stamp that they can only go to that grocery store. They have options, and I think that it's time for parents to have options in education as well.
Betsy DeVos will become Secretary of Education in the year the Department of Education is turning 150. It was founded 150 years ago, in fact, March 2nd. And when you look back at 1868, coming out of a Civil War, one of the first things that happened in the South were formerly enslaved Africans were the ones who took over Reconstruction governments. And they were the ones who introduced free, universal public education as we know it. And so when we're talking about vouchers and charters and options, let's be real clear. It was our people who were one of the first ones to make it a public part. But if you go back even to the 1700s before the Constitution was signed, Absalom Jones and others, black women also had underground schools. So the idea of education for what our community wants is older than the Constitution, older than the Bill of Rights, and older than the Declaration of Independence. We're just in the latest part of articulation.
Wow. That is really well said. It's almost, I don't even know what else you could say after that, to be honest, but if you understand 150 years is where we are. And it's really interesting because I think I'm sure you've been in meetings as well as Star, in terms of saying, well, you know, why do we have a Department of Education? What's the real use of that department? How do you see the Department of Education being a useful tool in our society, especially now since it's 150 years old?
I see it with a very limited role, but an oversight role to make sure that as we have a lot of options, someone is making sure that individuals are not being violated. We have to have a legal apparatus. What the Department of Education has done is moved into the social arena and has become an instrument of social engineering. It needs to be what it's supposed to be, and all of Washington is supposed to be, ensuring that everyone has an opportunity for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and making sure that it's consistent with its role in the founding documents and the Constitution, to make sure that people have somewhere to have a grievance and get recourse. Half of it can probably go away overnight if it moves back to its proper role. I do not see it going away forever. I think that the states would not even appreciate it going away forever, because the states need to make sure, are we doing it well? Or how do we know that we're doing it well? And so that's how I see the role of the Department of Education. Very limited, far from much of what it's doing right now, which has become a nuisance to many around the country, just constantly adding more to persons' lives. The public square should be a safe place. It should not be a place that we're forced for our lives to touch. This is why we have such a crisis in our society now, and what some call a cultural war, because government has forced our lives to touch in places that some individuals don't want them touching. So when you start removing those governments out of the way and allow people to live free, I think things will be much better.
Wow, well said. Appreciate that. Any last words you would have? I mean, I know we're about to embark upon a pretty tremendous day here today with the confirmation hearings moving forward, but any last words you would say about education choice and even the future of education in this administration?
Well, my last word would be the column I wrote for Creators this week is about just Sessions confirmation hearings, but I named it "Conservatism is Not Racism." And what has happened over time is every time the opposition does not like an appointment, they say they're racist. It would be hard to put that name and allow it to stick on Betsy DeVos, but we will hear it, and therefore we need to be prepared to say that conservatism is not racism. We need to allow the conservative worldview to finally get a chance to come to the table and see if maybe they have some good ideas. Maybe we might actually give opportunity for the next Michael Brown before their blood is in the street and they're on the headlines of the paper.
I think it's a great time to be a student, to be a parent who's got a number of options, public and otherwise. I think it's a great time to be a teacher. And we should use this opportunity, 150 years, just to recommit ourselves as a nation to show why education matters and what role from a civil society perspective can we as people play in the role.
Wow, that's tremendous. I was thinking about this a little bit, and when somebody asked me just yesterday, said, you know, what really does a potential new Secretary of Education bring to the table? And I said, you know what? One is innovation. Two is real established leadership. Then I think the third one is passion. And I said, don't discredit passion. Somebody who's passionately been involved, passionately been working on this, when they have other options of other things to do. And it's just like I tell people all the time, Star, about even your story. I said, she can go and be a syndicated columnist by herself. You can go and do things by yourself, but you had the passion and drive to establish a think and do tank in D.C. to say these issues are important. And it's more about the long-term legacy of what we will build, because if we only look within these small windows and say, this is what's going to affect the next 3, 5, 4, 8, 9, 10 years, right, that's very short term. We're looking at, say, what's going the future generation look like 30, 40 years from now. And I think it's because of what we do now is going to speak to those future generations.
I can't think of the company, but there was a CEO of a Japanese company who put together a strategic plan.
Yeah.
It was a 500-year strategic plan.
Wow.
And I had to stop and think. I'm like, I'm just struggling with 3 years. 100-year strategic plan. It means you know something about demography, something about evolutionary biology, you know something about climate change, you know something about mineral. Even if you don't do it, the fact that you can think that far, and that's what we should tell our kids. Why not?
Why not? Why not? That's good.
Right.
Well, thank you all for joining us. Thank you for coming.
And thank you for your leadership in this area on poverty and family and opportunity. You were doing it before it was popular, and you were doing it when people said it made no sense, and now there are people making a lot of money in this industry. But I want to thank you for your leadership and integrity in the work.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Well, that concludes our session if anybody's here, but we will take any questions. If we do have anybody that wants to ask a question, we'll do that. Yes?
Hi, I apologize. I came in a little late.
Oh, you can come on up.
I came in a little late, so my apologies if you addressed this, but I saw that a grassroots coalition had sent a letter about Betsy DeVos's sort of recent support of Common Core, just raising concerns about that. So I wondered if you had thoughts on that, and also just some immediate steps that you would like to see in education in the Trump administration.
Good question.
I believe that Betsy DeVos was asked about Common Core. Her work is extensively helping poor children get quality education. Once she takes her seat in the Department of Education, I'm sure that they will look at all of the apparatus, including Common Core, and make sure that it's consistent with ideas of freedom. I think when we look at one issue that the department does, we're getting too far into the weeds, but I do know Mrs. DeVos has a worldview consistent with liberty, and so that means that she will perhaps look at places where government is overreaching and pull it back.
When she was asked that question, she said she never supported a federalized Common Core. I'm sure that question will come up again today. You get the same answer. She's committed to a common sense approach, because at the end of the day, what we want isn't a debate about Common Core as much as trying to understand a common chord, something that connects us today to a better future.
Good point. Yes, sir.
Brandon with Cure, actually. I would just ask the question that people that are saying that the public schools would take a big hit, and as you discussed at the beginning, what extent are the charter schools also public? So to say that you're going to get rid of public schools by promoting charter schools, isn't a charter school to a certain extent a public school as well, though?
Gerard.
So it is. You've got 45 states with a charter law. I've read every single law. I published a piece March of last year where I looked at 102 laws. So they are public schools. They have to abide by the same rules and regulations. They're given some regulatory freedom, but so are magnet schools, and no one ever questions whether magnet schools are in fact charter schools. There are STEM-based theme schools. No one ever questions whether they're public schools. It's only when we talk about charter schools that somehow we try to make them private schools. They're public schools, and that's pretty well ingrained in law.
Good point.
I have a question that's not the most timely. I'm Alice Lloyd from the Weekly Standard. Where should I stand? Oh, okay, like an ice cream cone, right. So I've been looking at single-sex public and charter schools, and this seems like an area in which educational theorists, sort of social theorists, diverge from parents and educators very sharply, and I was wondering if you'd be interested in speaking to that.
What's your take on it?
I'm pro single-sex education because I went to a single-sex school personally, and I certainly respect that it's something that parents choose, and I think I can understand that, and I know that that it served lower-income communities very well, but I'm only just beginning to look at its real meaning.
I'm for it. I believe that parents should choose, and if they decide that it would be much better for their child to focus their education, in particular our young African American men that are coming out of very complicated family lives, that this is healthy for our society, that we should encourage any and all options for people to be able to get a quality education. It's fascinating that there again we have single-sex college, but we can't have single-sex high school. Freedom stops when the child gets to kindergarten. Prior to kindergarten, there are many options. I used to live on welfare, and I could take my child with my little child care voucher to any daycare I wanted to. They could have all kind of Christian symbols. They could teach a Bible. They could even be speaking another language. It didn't matter. But as soon as they get to kindergarten and through the 12th grade, we force them in this one-size-fits-all apparatus. Then after 12th grade, they get options again. Let's allow options for when it matters most, which is the 3rd grade. But at least if we can get them to the 3rd grade and they know how to read, then when they get to that 3rd grade, we will be able to watch criminal justice reform overnight by itself, just because children have an opportunity to get a quality education. So we want to start them at kindergarten, but with choices.
Learning in a single gender environment is older than the public school system itself. We've had that for a very long time. I'll give you a personal story. In a previous life, I was president of the Black Alliance for Educational Options. And we received a grant from the Gates Foundation to provide seed money to local communities who wanted to create a school. Well, one of the schools that we helped to create is Boys Latin of Philadelphia. David Hardy is the principal or founding principal of that school. David Hardy had twins, and they went to a friend's school. He's like, why can't more inner city boys in Philadelphia have access to a great single gender education like this? Oh, it's called tuition. It's gonna be tough to do. So he said, let's create a public school. I believe it was the People for the American Way, or it could have been another group, who for years blocked that school from opening because they said you are discriminating against girls. It ultimately took a group of black mothers to say, listen, we love we're raising our daughters and we love our sons. For our sons, they need this environment, and we'll look at opening up a school forward. Fast forward today, their school has over a 90% college-going rate. The majority of those students are first generation to go to school. University of Pennsylvania has a great crew team. They went to the school early and said, we'll be honest, we don't see a lot of black men in crew. Can we be involved? They became coaches, and then the boys ended up winning some championships. It went from concept to concrete. A family is saying, this is what we want, and yet the social engineer standing on the sideline, who didn't live in the same zip code, said you shouldn't have it. So while I think there are times where we use single gender education in ways to discriminate, that probably exists, but rather than focus always just on the intent of discrimination, I like to start off with the intent of education.
Of education. Good point. Yeah. Anybody else? All right, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Good to go.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Gerard. Appreciate that, man.